The moment my 9-year-old son Lucas stood up in that packed courtroom and asked his father if he should tell everyone what he made him delete, you could have heard a pin drop. Every person in that room turned to look at this small boy who had just shattered the carefully constructed lies his own father had been telling for months. I'm Sophia Reed, and I thought I understood how brutal custody battles could get. I'd prepared myself for character assassination, for twisted truths, for expensive lawyers twisting every word I'd ever said. What I never expected was for my own child to become the star witness in exposing a deception that went deeper than I could have imagined. For 2 years, I'd been fighting my ex-husband Ryan Blake for custody of Lucas. Ryan is a construction supervisor who knows how to manage people, how to present the right image when it matters. He's charming when he needs to be, authoritative when it serves him, and he's never met a situation he couldn't control. His mother, Carol, has been his biggest supporter throughout this entire process, convinced that I'm nothing more than a vindictive ex-wife trying to steal her grandson away from their family. Lucas is caught in the middle of all this. He's 9 years old, loves soccer and video games, and has the kind of honest heart that makes him terrible at keeping secrets. He adores his father despite everything, which made this whole situation so much more complicated. Lucas never wanted to choose sides, never wanted to hurt anyone, and definitely never wanted to be standing in a courtroom about to reveal something that would change our lives forever. Judge Helen Carter has been overseeing family court cases for 15 years. She's seen every trick, every manipulation, every desperate parent trying to gain an advantage. She runs her courtroom with fairness but no tolerance for games, and she has a particular gift for seeing through the performances that desperate parents put on when they're fighting for their children. But what happened that day wasn't a performance. When Lucas found the courage to speak up, he wasn't trying to hurt his father or help me win. He was simply a child who had been carrying a burden too heavy for his small shoulders, and he finally found a safe space to put it down. The question he asked his father in front of that judge, his grandmother, the lawyers, and a room full of strangers would expose a web of manipulation that none of us saw coming. This isn't just another story about a messy divorce or a bitter custody fight. This is about what happens when a child finds his voice at exactly the moment when the adults around him have lost theirs. This is about the moment when truth cuts through lies so clearly that even a room full of legal professionals stops breathing. And this is about discovering that sometimes the person you need to trust most is the one who still believes that honesty matters, even when the grown-ups have forgotten. What my son said next would not only change the outcome of our custody case, but it would reveal a side of his father that I never knew existed. It would show me that children see and understand far more than we give them credit for, and that protecting them sometimes means giving them the space to protect themselves. 2 years before that courtroom moment, I believed I was married to a good man. Ryan Blake swept me off my feet during my late 20s with his confidence and devotion to family. He was the kind of guy who remembered anniversaries, who showed up to every one of Lucas's Little League games, who talked about building a future together with the kind of certainty that made me feel safe. When he proposed on the beach in Malibu, I genuinely thought I'd found my person. The first few years of our marriage felt like everything I'd hoped for. Ryan worked hard at his construction job, often pulling overtime to make sure we could afford the house we wanted in a good school district. I was building my career in marketing, and he seemed genuinely proud of my success. When Lucas was born, Ryan transformed into the kind of father I'd dreamed of for my child. He would get up for night feedings without complaint, spent hours teaching Lucas to throw a baseball, and bragged about our son to anyone who would listen. But somewhere around year 6 of our marriage, small cracks began to show. Ryan started questioning my work schedule more frequently, making comments about how much time I spent on client calls or working late. He began monitoring our finances more closely, asking detailed questions about every purchase I made. When I got promoted to senior marketing coordinator, his congratulations felt forced, followed by concerns about how the new responsibilities might affect our family time. The controlling behavior escalated gradually. Ryan started insisting on knowing exactly where I was at all times, texting me throughout the day asking for updates. He would check the mileage on my car and question any discrepancies. He began making decisions about Lucas's schedule without consulting me, signing him up for activities or arranging playdates without asking my opinion. When I confronted him about these changes, Ryan would turn it back on me, claiming I was being oversensitive or that he was just trying to be a more involved husband and father. The breaking point came during Lucas's 7th birthday party. I had planned a small celebration with family and a few of his friends from school. Ryan invited his coworkers and their families without telling me, then criticized me in front of everyone for not having enough food prepared. When I pulled him aside to discuss it privately, he accused me of trying to embarrass him and suggested that my inability to handle unexpected guests showed how selfish I'd become. That night, after everyone had gone home, I realized I was walking on eggshells in my own house. The divorce process began civilly enough. Ryan seemed to accept that our marriage was over, and we both agreed that Lucas's well-being was our top priority. I made it clear that I wanted Lucas to maintain a strong relationship with his father, despite our personal problems. I encouraged regular overnight visits, made sure Ryan was included in all school events and medical appointments, and even invited his family to Lucas's 8th birthday party, because I knew how much our son loved his grandmother Carol. But after a few months of shared custody arrangements, I started noticing changes in Lucas that concerned me. After spending weekends with his father, Lucas would come home quiet and withdrawn. He used to chatter endlessly about his adventures, but now he would give me one-word answers when I asked about his time with Ryan. I found him crying in his room one evening after a visit, and when I asked what was wrong, he said he felt confused about things but couldn't explain what he meant. Lucas also became secretive about his phone and tablet usage. Previously, he had been open about the games he played and videos he watched, often wanting to share funny clips with me. Now he would quickly close apps when I walked into the room and seemed anxious when I asked to see what he was doing online. When I mentioned this to Ryan during one of our custody exchanges, he dismissed my concerns as overthinking and suggested that Lucas was just growing up and wanting more privacy. The financial strain of legal fees was crushing. My lawyer bills were already in the thousands, and we hadn't even reached the formal custody hearing yet. I was working extra hours to cover the costs while trying to maintain some sense of normalcy for Lucas. Sleep became elusive as I lay awake worrying about how this process was affecting my son, and wondering if I was doing the right thing by fighting for primary custody. Ryan's family rallied around him completely. Carol Blake had never been particularly warm toward me during our marriage, but now she was openly hostile. She would make cutting remarks during custody exchanges and had started sending Lucas home with gifts and treats, making comments about how much more fun he had at their house. I felt like I was fighting not just Ryan, but his entire support system. As we approached the custody hearing, I realized I was about to face the fight of my life against people who had decided I was the enemy of their family's happiness. The morning of the custody hearing, I woke up at 5 a.m. with my heart already racing. I had laid out my clothes the night before, choosing a conservative navy blue dress that I hoped would convey stability and respectability. As I got Lucas ready for school, I tried to act normal, making his favorite breakfast and asking about his upcoming math test. He seemed quieter than usual, giving me long looks that felt like he wanted to say something important, but couldn't find the words. Walking into the courthouse felt like entering enemy territory. Ryan's family had arrived early and claimed an entire row of benches. Carol Blake sat in the center, flanked by Ryan's sister Jennifer and his uncle Mark, all of them dressed in their Sunday best and wearing expressions of righteous indignation. When I walked past with my attorney, Carol made a point of whispering something to Jennifer that made them both shake their heads in disapproval. The message was clear. I was the villain in their family story. My attorney, Sarah Martinez, had prepared me for what was coming, but hearing it in person felt like being punched in the stomach repeatedly. When Carol took the stand, she transformed into the picture of a concerned grandmother who had watched her son's marriage crumble due to his wife's selfishness and vindictive nature. Your Honor, Sophia has used that precious child as a weapon against my son from the moment she filed for divorce, Carol testified, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. She schedules Lucas's activities deliberately to conflict with Ryan's visitation time. She asks leading questions about what happens at our house, trying to get Lucas to say something negative about his father. My son is a devoted father who coached Lucas's soccer team for 3 years, who never missed a school play or parent-teacher conference. But Sophia can't stand that Lucas loves his father. so she's determined to destroy that relationship. Carol went on to describe incidents that sounded plausible, but felt twisted. She claimed I had forbidden Lucas from calling Ryan during the week, when in reality I had encouraged daily phone calls that Ryan rarely made. She said I badmouthed Ryan in front of Lucas, which was absolutely untrue, but she delivered it with such conviction that I could see the judge taking notes. The worst part was watching Carol's performance, knowing that she genuinely believed every word she was saying because Ryan had been feeding her a carefully constructed version of events for months. When Ryan took the stand, I barely recognized the man I had been married to for 8 years. Gone was the confident, sometimes arrogant construction supervisor I knew. In his place was a heartbroken father who just wanted to love his son without interference from his bitter ex-wife. "Your Honor, I don't understand what happened to the woman I married," Ryan said, his voice breaking at just the right moments. "Sophia used to encourage my relationship with Lucas. She used to say what a great father I was. But the moment I couldn't give her everything she wanted in our marriage, she turned our son against me. Lucas used to run to me when I picked him up for weekends. Now he barely looks at me when I arrive. He used to tell me about his day, ask me questions, want to play catch in the backyard. Now he sits in his room with his tablet, barely speaking to me." Ryan painted a picture of himself as the victim of parental alienation, claiming that I had systematically brainwashed Lucas against him. He described how Lucas had started asking strange questions about why Daddy made Mommy sad. Questions that Ryan insisted could only have come from my influence. He told the court that Lucas had become anxious and withdrawn during visits, behavior that Ryan attributed to the stress I was putting on our son by making him feel guilty for loving his father. "She's poisoned his mind against me, Your Honor," Ryan continued, now with tears in his eyes that looked completely genuine. "My own son flinches when I try to hug him. He acts like he's afraid of me, and I know that's not coming from anything I've done. Sophia has made Lucas believe that loving his father means betraying his mother, and it's destroying all of us." The most devastating part of Ryan's testimony was how reasonable he sounded. He acknowledged that our marriage had problems, admitted that he wasn't perfect, and expressed his desire for Lucas to have a good relationship with both parents. He presented himself as the rational parent who just wanted what was best for everyone, while positioning me as the emotional, vindictive ex-wife who couldn't move on. Sitting there listening to these accusations, I felt completely powerless. Every instinct told me to jump up and defend myself, to point out the lies and contradictions, to tell the court about Ryan's increasingly controlling behavior that had driven me to file for divorce in the first place. But Sarah had coached me extensively about courtroom demeanor, warning me that any emotional outburst would validate their claims about my vindictive nature. So I sat in silence, watching my ex-husband and his mother systematically destroy my character, while presenting themselves as the true victims of our broken family. As I watched Ryan finish his testimony, painting himself as the devoted father being systematically destroyed by his vindictive ex-wife, I felt the overwhelming urge to stand up and scream the truth. My hands were clenched so tightly in my lap that my nails were digging into my palms, and I could feel my face burning with the injustice of it all. But Sarah Martinez, my attorney, had spent hours preparing me for exactly this moment. "Sophia, the most important thing you can do in that courtroom is stay calm," she had told me during our last preparation session. "Ryan and his family are counting on you to have an emotional outburst. They want you to look unstable, vindictive, exactly like they're claiming you are. Your silence will be more powerful than any defense you could give." So I made the hardest decision of my life. I chose to trust the process instead of my emotions. When Sarah stood up for cross-examination, I forced myself to breathe slowly and watch her methodically dismantle the carefully constructed narrative that Ryan's family had presented. Sarah started with Carol, asking seemingly innocent questions that revealed the cracks in her testimony. "Mrs. Blake, you mentioned that Sophia deliberately schedules activities to conflict with Ryan's visitation. Can you tell me the specific dates when this happened?" Carol fumbled through her answer, unable to provide concrete examples. Sarah pressed further. "You said Sophia asks Lucas leading questions about his time with his father. Were you present during these conversations?" Again, Carol had to admit she was relying on secondhand information from Ryan. With each question, Sarah exposed how much of Carol's testimony was based on assumptions and Ryan's version of events rather than first-hand knowledge. I watched Carol's confidence crumble as she realized she couldn't provide the specific details that would support her dramatic claims. When Sarah turned to cross-examine Ryan, I could see the first flickers of panic in his eyes. She started with his parenting schedule, asking him to describe Lucas's daily routine, his favorite foods, his current teachers' names, his best friends at school. Ryan's answers were vague and often incorrect. When asked about Lucas's recent anxiety issues, Ryan claimed they started after the divorce proceedings began. But Sarah produced school counselor reports showing Lucas had been struggling with anxiety for over a year, well before I filed for divorce. Mr. Blake, you testified that Lucas used to run to you during pickups but now barely acknowledges you. Can you describe the last conversation you had with your son that wasn't about the custody case or his mother? Ryan paused, clearly struggling to think of an example. His confident facade was beginning to crack. Sarah then asked about his living situation, his work schedule, and his social life since the separation. Ryan became defensive when questioned about the consistency of his parenting time and whether he had ever canceled visits with Lucas for personal reasons. I could see him getting agitated, his voice rising slightly as Sarah pressed him about specific incidents he had claimed never happened. It was during this tense cross-examination that I noticed Lucas in the gallery. My son had been sitting quietly with my mother throughout the proceedings, and I had assumed he was distracted or maybe even bored by the legal proceedings. But as I glanced back at him, I realized he was paying intense attention to every word his father was saying. Lucas's body language told a story that broke my heart. His shoulders were rigid with tension, his hands were fidgeting with the hem of his shirt, and his face showed the kind of internal struggle I had learned to recognize over the past few months. These were the same signs I had seen after difficult visits with his father, the same expressions that appeared when Lucas wanted to tell me something, but felt he couldn't. I caught Lucas's eye, and for a moment, we just looked at each other across that courtroom. In his face, I saw a 9-year-old boy who was tired of carrying secrets, tired of being caught between the adults in his life, and tired of watching his father say things that didn't match the reality Lucas had experienced. That's when I made my second crucial decision of the day. Instead of continuing to shield Lucas from this adult conflict, I realized that maybe it was time to trust my son's judgment and his ability to speak his own truth. I turned to Sarah and gave her a small nod, a signal we had discussed in case Lucas needed to be heard during the proceedings. Sarah understood immediately. She wrapped up her cross-examination of Ryan and approached the bench to speak quietly with Judge Carter. I watched as they had a brief conversation, during which the judge looked over at Lucas with the kind of careful attention she gave to important evidence. Judge Carter nodded to Sarah, then addressed the courtroom. I'd like to hear from Lucas, if he has something he'd like to share with the court. The moment I had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure had finally arrived. The courtroom fell completely silent as Judge Carter asked Lucas to approach the bench. I watched my 9-year-old son walk down that long aisle, his small frame dwarfed by the imposing legal setting around him. Every eye in the room was on him, but Lucas kept his gaze fixed straight ahead, showing a courage that amazed me. Judge Carter spoke to him gently, explaining that he could say whatever he needed to say and that no one would be upset with him for telling the truth. Lucas nodded solemnly, then turned to look directly at his father. What happened next will be burned into my memory forever. Dad, Lucas said, his voice clear and steady despite his young age. Should I tell them what you made me delete from my tablet? The change in Ryan was instantaneous and dramatic. All the color drained from his face, and I watched him go from confident to terrified in the span of a single heartbeat. His mouth opened and closed like he was trying to speak, but no words came out. The carefully constructed image of the devoted father crumbled in real time as everyone in that courtroom realized a 9-year-old was about to expose something significant. Judge Carter leaned forward with the intense focus I had seen her use when examining crucial evidence. Lucas, can you tell me more about what you had to delete? My son took a deep breath, the kind adults take when they're about to do something difficult but necessary. Dad made me delete text messages after our last visit. He said Mom didn't need to know about our private conversations. But they weren't regular conversations. like asking about homework or what I wanted for dinner. Lucas explained that Ryan had been asking him detailed questions about my daily routines, my work schedule, who I talked to on the phone, and whether I had been dating anyone. Ryan would have Lucas text him updates throughout the week about what I was doing, where we went, and what I said about the custody case. When Lucas would visit on weekends, Ryan would go through these messages with him and make him delete anything that might make Ryan look bad if I ever saw the phone. He also made me delete pictures, Lucas continued, his voice getting stronger as he spoke. Dad had different ladies over when I was there, and he said if Mom found out about his friends, she would try to make the judge think bad things about him. So I had to delete the pictures from when we all watched movies together or when they made breakfast with us. The revelation hit the courtroom like a bomb. Ryan had been using our son as a spy while simultaneously exposing him to a parade of overnight guests that he had specifically hidden from the court. Judge Carter's expression shifted from professional interest to barely contained anger as she processed what Lucas was telling her. Ryan's attorney jumped up, trying to object or minimize the damage, but Judge Carter silenced him with a look that could have frozen fire. She immediately requested that the bailiffs secure both parents' phones and tablets for forensic examination, and demanded any available security footage from Ryan's apartment building for the dates in question. That's when Ryan completely fell apart. Faced with the prospect of digital evidence that would corroborate Lucas's testimony, he broke down entirely. Through tears and desperate explanations, he admitted to coaching Lucas on what information to gather about me. He confessed to having Lucas delete evidence of their inappropriate conversations about the custody case. Most damaging of all, he acknowledged that he had been bringing different women to his apartment during Lucas's visits while telling the court he was providing a stable, consistent environment for our son. I just wanted to make sure Sophia wasn't trying to turn him against me. Ryan sobbed, his composure completely gone. I needed to know what she was saying about me, what she was planning. I never meant to hurt Lucas. I was just trying to protect my relationship with my son. But the damage was irreversible. Judge Carter's face showed a mixture of disgust and disappointment as she realized that Ryan had turned a 9-year-old child into an unwilling accomplice in his deception. The security footage, when it arrived an hour later, confirmed Lucas's account. The video showed Ryan bringing at least 3 different women to his apartment during custody visits, directly contradicting his testimony about focusing solely on his relationship with Lucas during their time together. Carol Blake sat in stunned silence as her son's lies unraveled in front of everyone. The grandmother, who had painted me as vindictive and manipulative, was now watching her own son admit to manipulating their grandson in ways that were far worse than anything she had accused me of doing. Lucas stood there through it all, no longer the confused, anxious child who had been carrying these secrets for months. He had found his voice at exactly the moment when the truth needed to be heard, and his courage had exposed a web of deception that none of the adults in his life had suspected. Judge Carter didn't need to deliberate for long. After reviewing the digital evidence and security footage, she awarded me primary custody of Lucas, with Ryan receiving only supervised visitation until he completed a court-mandated parenting program and psychological evaluation. The judge made it clear that using a child as an informant and exposing him to a revolving door of overnight guests showed a fundamental lack of judgment that put Lucas's well-being at risk. The legal consequences extended beyond just the custody arrangement. Carol Blake faced perjury charges for her testimony, which had been proven false by the evidence Lucas provided. Ryan's manipulation of our son and his attempts to coach Lucas on what to report back to him violated multiple court orders about appropriate parental conduct during custody proceedings. The judge referred the case to Child Protective Services for additional investigation, though ultimately no further action was taken since Lucas was now in a stable environment. The immediate aftermath was emotionally complex for all of us. Lucas initially felt terrible about what had happened to his father, convinced that he had somehow caused Ryan's downfall by telling the truth. He came to me the night after the hearing with tears in his eyes, asking if he had done something wrong by speaking up in court. "Sweetheart, telling the truth is never wrong," I told him as we sat on his bed surrounded by his stuffed animals. "What your dad asked you to do wasn't fair to you. You're 9 years old. You should never have to keep secrets about adult problems, and you should never have to spy on your mom for anyone, even your dad. We started family therapy immediately, which helped Lucas process the guilt and confusion he felt about his father's behavior. Dr. Rebecca Stone, our therapist, explained to Lucas that children aren't responsible for their parents' choices, and that speaking up when something feels wrong is actually very brave. Through these sessions, Lucas learned that the uncomfortable feelings he had been experiencing during visits with his father were his instincts telling him that something wasn't right. The healing process took months, but gradually I watched my son return to the happy, talkative child he had been before the custody battle began. Lucas started sleeping better, his anxiety decreased significantly, and he began opening up about his experiences without fear of getting anyone in trouble. He even started talking about his father with more clarity, acknowledging that he loved Ryan while also understanding that his dad had made some very poor choices. Ryan's supervised visits initially were awkward and tense. He struggled to interact with Lucas without trying to gather information about me or justify his previous behavior. Over time, with the help of the court-appointed supervisor and his own therapy, Ryan began to rebuild a more appropriate relationship with our son. It took nearly a year, but eventually Ryan was able to progress to unsupervised visits, though he never regained overnight privileges. The most profound lesson I learned from this experience was about trusting children's instincts and voices. For months, I had noticed changes in Lucas's behavior, but had attributed them to the stress of divorce rather than recognizing them as signs that something specific was wrong. I had been so focused on protecting him from the adult conflict that I hadn't created space for him to tell me what he was actually experiencing. Lucas taught me that children are far more perceptive than we give them credit for. He had recognized that his father's requests were inappropriate, but he didn't have the language or confidence to express his discomfort until he was in an environment where truth-telling was not only safe, but necessary. That courtroom became the place where a 9-year-old found his voice and used it to protect himself when the adults around him had failed to do so. The experience also showed me the importance of staying calm and trusting the process, even when everything inside you wants to fight back emotionally. If I had lost my composure during Ryan's testimony, if I had tried to defend myself against his lies, I would have validated their claims about my vindictive nature. By staying quiet and letting the truth emerge naturally, I allowed Lucas the space to speak when he was ready. Today, Lucas is thriving. He's back to his old self, chattering about school and friends, excited about soccer season, and no longer carrying the weight of adult secrets. He has a healthy relationship with his father within appropriate boundaries, and he knows that his voice matters in our family. Most importantly, he learned that telling the truth, even when it's difficult, is always the right choice. If this story resonates with you, if you've been through a custody battle or know someone who has, please share this video. Your comments about your own experiences help create a community where parents and children can find support during difficult times. And if you want to hear more real stories about overcoming family challenges, subscribe to this channel. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the smallest voices, and Lucas's courage to speak up changed everything for our family.